China has a big secret. The second largest economy in the world has been subject to all things weird and mysterious. Since the pandemic, thousands of conspiracy theories have gone viral online. Why do you think China was able to grow this big? What are they hiding? What's the secret? In this episode, World IQ will dive into China's troubled past and unravel the truth behind its economic success. Let's get it. Do you ever wonder why things happen? It's important to understand the context. Imagine this. In the early 60s, there were only less than 700 million people in China. During this time, the GDP was less than $600 billion. Now it's 17 trillion. Things started to pick up in the late 70s when China implemented its open door policy. It wasn't anywhere near smooth. When you've been in isolation for 30 years and suddenly you open your doors to foreigners, it will raise some eyebrows. The policy opened their economy to the rest of the world, and the young and booming workforce received all the investments. Jobs and opportunities were everywhere. They were abundant. This policy presented economic, cultural, and political reforms that allowed China to increase foreign trade, and foreign direct investments flowed into China at staggering rates. In 1978, they mobilized the Four Modernizations policy that focused on agriculture, industry, science and technology, and defense. China's economic growth rates reached double figures, and the overall educational attainment of the Chinese population also increased. Chinese students were allowed to study and train overseas. The things happening outside China also contributed to its domestic changes. The Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed. All these things inspired reform-minded Chinese to challenge the government. Fang Lizi became a political enemy of the CCP, a prominent reform-minded intellectual exiled during the Cultural Revolution for supporting students to push for democracy and a more open political system. He also launched a campaign to free political prisoners. Fang challenged Marxist-Leninist ideologies by declaring the success of democratic states was due to their recognition of the people's fundamental rights. Fang was also influenced and inspired by Eastern European dissidents during the political changes of the Soviet bloc in the 80s. The world was changing and attempts to reform became more explicit. The final angle to look at before we unveil the secret would have to be the human rights issues before it happened. US President Jimmy Carter declared that human rights matters be at the heart of US foreign policy and negotiated full diplomatic relations with the PRC. Beijing could not progress with its open-door policies and simultaneously prevent external probing into domestic conditions. Amnesty International and other transnational NGOs reported on the needs of China, where abuses such as torture, arbitrary arrest, and detention without trial are observed. Access to Tibet provided information about the Chinese government's repression. Tibetans publicized and internationalized their struggles. The Tibetan lobby became active in London, New York, and Washington. The martial law declaration in Tibet in March 1989 intensified support for the Tibetan cause. Chinese citizens and the Chinese government had begun exploring the concept of rights. The Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution was a decade-long period of political and social chaos caused by Mao Zedong's bid to use the Chinese masses to reassert his control over the Communist Party. Violence erupted and schools, universities shut down. Economic reforms and China's domestic issues became the two ingredients that helped brew liberal ideas of political government reform. This was when things really pissed off the Chinese government, when the Chinese leadership decided in June 1989 to use force to suppress the demonstrations rocking the Chinese capital. These crucial shifts in the political and normative climates ensured that its actions would receive backlash. Protests became a thing, and they kept growing. Protesters were motivated by the death of a leading politician, Hu Yaobang, who had overseen some economic and political changes. Hu was pushed out of a top position in the party by political opponents 2 years earlier. Protesters gathered in Tiananmen Square, with numbers rising approximately 1 million. At first, the government took no direct action against the protesters, but things began to go haywire. Troops began to move towards Tiananmen Square, and That's when the crisis exploded. Tiananmen Massacre of June 1989 is one of China's most troubling political events in the 20th century. It was utter chaos, violence, and destruction. It's such a big open secret in China, and they want to keep it that way. Chinese authorities are increasing efforts to erase memories of the June 4, 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing. People across the globe still commemorate the event. According to Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, in previous years, the authorities have suppressed commemorations of the Tiananmen anniversary by restricting the movement and communication of activists and members of the Tiananmen Mothers, a group of relatives of victims of the 1989 massacre. On May 27, 2023, activist Chen Siming was detained in Hunan province after refusing to delete his tweet commemorating Tiananmen. Activist Shi Shuanghe was warned by police in Shandong not to participate in commemoration activities. In 2022, Hangzhou authorities detained activist Hu Guang after he demanded acknowledgement of the 1989 pro-democracy movement massacre. He was later tried for picking quarrels and provoking trouble, and the verdict is pending. We don't hear much of things like this, but there is a hidden history of protests in China, like the one in November 2022 called White Paper Protests. Videos on social media showed protests across universities and cities in China, including Beijing, Guangdong, Shanghai, and Wuhan. Peaceful protesters commemorated Urumqi fire victims, called for easing lockdown measures and ending censorship, and some called for President Xi's resignation. The Chinese government turned a blind eye to the domestic and international calls for justice for the massacre. Even after the sanctions from the European Union and the US did not do much to deter Chinese aggression and its policies on matters like this, China wants to erase a significant part of its history by cracking down on everything that remotely acknowledges or explicitly expresses sentiments regarding the massacre. But the world knows. You know. It's up to us to remember the brave students who fought for their freedom. Where do you stand on issues like this? Do you think it's right for the Chinese government to continue suppressing all forms of protest? Let us know in the comments.